Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The People Business, specifically at Common Thread Collective. But our hope is that this conversation is not only helpful for us to process some things out loud, but really for anyone who's tuning in as they're working at the kinks of their people business, that this is somehow helpful. Orchid, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dane. Nice to see you again. I mean, we see each other. We get the pleasure of seeing each other every day.
Every day,
but
quite a bit.
Specifically in these little boxes that are different from our Zoom boxes.
It's amazing. What would we do without these little virtual boxes? It's just extraordinary to me. So some quick context if you guys are new to the show. My name is Dane Sanders. I oversee employee development and performance. So what that means in a nutshell is we take our real human beings, think about, gosh, what would them flourishing at work look like? And what are the contributing factors to that? Attitudinally, behavioristically, environmentally. There's so many different kind of facets of looking at setting a system such that individuals develop and perform really, really well in a way that not only gets a great output, but gets a great life for the individuals doing it. And Orchid is our chief operating officer. Orchid, what do you do besides herd cats?
Oh my goodness. I should be chief cat herder. And being head of operations is this funny thing, but I'm responsible for the day-to-day running of the company, which means having the right people in the right places doing the right things, I think is the easiest way to say it.
Yeah. I'm guessing like even in the right way at the right time. Like, it just seems like what a torturous existence you have.
Well, I guess I'm a bit of a masochist, so it actually works out well. But I think, the space, it's great. So the analogy I use for how Taylor and I, or most CEOs and COOs operate in our relationship is, the Olympic sport of curling, the Winter Olympic sport.
Sure do. I'm Canadian. So
well, that's right.
One thing we're good at. So
that's probably your national sport. And I would say the CEO, their role is to throw the puck, right? Like they are aiming to where the puck needs to go. And the COO, and I think often the CFO, we're the one with the brooms clearing the path in order to get to where we want to go. And so I think it's a very symbiotic relationship. And yes, you have to be a little bit of a masochist and ready to get back down into the details for the job to work.
Well, let's get into some of those details right now, because I think, let me just back up a little bit. I hope this will be the first of a number of episodes where we kind of build out some frameworks or some lenses through which to look at the people business. And I think they're all going to be kind of slightly different and nuanced. But today's, I think, is one that we talk a lot about as an organization that I hope will be helpful. And a quick qualifier that even though we are an agency and we have a very particular kind of definition of some of these pieces, and we'll take our time to walk through all of them, even if you are watching this or listening to this and it's not an exact fit, we promise these categories are very relevant to your success, and we think that they will be helpful. But we're going to talk about 3 specific concentric circles. So if you picture one circle here, one circle here, one circle here, they all have kind of some overlap, and it's that section in the middle that we're trying to get just right. And the 3 categories we're going to talk about, maybe, Orchid, you could help us define some of these, are people, product, and process. What do we mean when we say people, product, and process as it relates to the people business?
So how I started to think about this was as we look at every level of employee. So you have your individual contributors, you have your managers, you have your directors, your VPs, and so on and so forth. And so the question for me was, at what vantage point does each person need to be at? And so when we think about the overall, like what a business is comprised of, obviously your people are your team members, your executives, your individual contributors. You also have process, which is like how everything works. And I would call this back-end operations. And then you have your product, right? And so in our case, as a growth agency, our product offering is actually the service that we provide. So if we think about it in terms of levels, I think at the individual contributor level, you're really kind of focused on, delivering the product, right? And adhering to the processes in order to scale it, have, the right level of quality, like however you want to define it. Then when you get to management level, it's about the people and the process, right? You're probably not really in product design. I would say as a manager, you're kind of more inwardly focused between people and operations, so people and process in this case. And then as a director and a VP level, that's where you start to design the product itself. So as an agency, we're of course talking about the service offering. So the expectations that directors are really thinking about how to continually evolve our service offering, so our product. They happen to also be aware of their people and how to develop their people and how to bring the best out of their people. And then also, I think like in terms of operations and processes, it really depends on the size of company you are, whether or not you have a separate ops department. If your expectation is that your director is building the processes, which I don't think they are, that's more at a management level. So thinking about it across those 3 Ps really helps me think about like my expectations from each level of team member.
So I'm kind of picturing almost like a 3-dimensional grid here, because like looking down at the concentric circles, I see people, product, and process, but you're kind of even going further and then looking at it dimensionally, and within people at least, you have your ICs, you have your managers, your directors, your VPs and leads, and each of those have a kind of a fundamentally different kind of relationship with the product and with the process.
Yes.
And depending on the size or scale or scope of the business, you might not have all of those levels, but the responsibilities still remain, and that there is some distinction. On the IC level, they're kind of doing the work at the kind of, at the deliverable to the client, but further upstream, they're designing all of those pieces, designing the bigger system, designing even the product and getting all of that stuff dialed in. Am I hearing that right?
Yes. So either your job is focusing on delivering the product or delivering the service at a certain quality level, or you're designing it. And I think it's important to kind of parse it apart in that not everybody's going to be responsible for everything. And I think that there's, as an agency, like as you're growing up, there are often times where you just send people in to be like almost like firefighters, right? And everybody ends up being a Swiss Army knife. And I think that in order to get the most impactful people working on the most impactful work, you really have to narrow the aperture a bit and be more specific about where people should focus and prioritize their time and effort relative to their experience and their responsibility set.
So I know this isn't the focus of our conversation today, but I just want to give a nod to it. It sounds like there's a 4th dimension here of like the timeline, right? So if I'm just starting out with my own, solo shop out of my garage or whatever, I am a Swiss Army knife. I'm the people making the product and figure out my processes. And then, you hire an assistant or you start building up and then start dividing and conquering, and you're throwing roles at, oh, that's a pain, just take care of it. But we're talking about, gosh, if you can upgrade your mental model of relating with the business itself and you have capital or a means by which you can organize yourself, these are the things that you're progressively organizing. Is that accurate?
I think so. I think depending on the state of your company, the maturity of your company, the size of your company, you may have to, I think it's also like helpful to think about which mind space you need to be in at any particular time, right? Because problems don't come like pre-organized, or when you think about like tagging infrastructure, like they don't come in and say like, oh, this is this type of problem. It's like you are given a challenge, and then you as a leader or as an individual have to decide what is the right type of solution to solve this problem. And so oftentimes it could be, okay, does our product need to be designed better? Does it need to be refined? Is this a product problem? Or is this a people challenge, right? Do I just not have the right person working on the right account or within this responsibility set? Because I've certainly seen before where we've put certain people in people management places where they're actually much happier and much better in back-end operations. And so a lot of it is like, do you have the right people, and do you have the right people in the right places? And then I think in terms of process, like there is such a thing as over engineering or like putting too much process into something where you end up hindering the movements of it. Or I think oftentimes when you over process like a human service, for instance, you end up hiring a bunch of people who can check the box or complete the Asana task. But then when a novel problem comes up where you need some creative problem solving, it's not always the same people who are able to do that. So there is a way, and I've seen it before, we've done it before, where we've over-engineered a process only to slow us down and actually deliver a product that wasn't as good as if we like took out some of those steps.
Fascinating. Okay. So let's break down, because really that last piece is particularly interesting to me, because in that process conversation, can you give a couple of examples of what you're describing, like over engineering a process versus going, here's an amazingly elegant solution to a problem in the systems process kind of bucket that we've learned from, in particular at CTC?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of examples where we have Asana boards and tasks with like 50 subtasks underneath, right? And so I think, we've seen this in the case of our email deployment. So we've redesigned that process. But historically, we had like 50 subtasks for like QA and all these things. And like sometimes when you have the right person who can think in the right way, they don't need to actually check all the boxes, right? And so I think there is a sweet spot between what is your expectation of your people and the altitude that they can actually think at versus how do you build the process to free them up to do the important work rather than creating so much process that it ends up being the bottleneck, right? And so that is a bit of art and science. And so I think, again, it really is looking at all of the processes you have in place, whether you have, really extensive SOPs or, very cumbersome Asana boards, and really thinking about the what you want your people to deliver. And then just re-looking at everything you have in place and saying, is this helpful or is this actually harmful? And then you have to go through that evaluation process on a regular basis.
How often do you think? Because I could see how this could be like certain personality type could be like, I love kind of refining and revolutionizing and building our tech stack. And this new tool just came out. And some of what you're describing is actually, no, we're actually going to wholesale get rid of a whole section of things and solve it with one little thing. Or that used to be a relevant system, but given the market, the industry, the culture, who we have become, that's not as relevant anymore. Is there kind of a rule of thumb that you think about in terms of reviewing processes relative to your goals?
I think if there are certain Asana boards that we use in order to check, hypercare, meaning, is there a client that needs a little more attention at this point from either subject matter experts, from the executive team, whoever it might be. And so that process, that Asana board, like everybody is in it every day. And so I think something like that, you would probably want to go through improvements on a quarterly basis, right? Because there is also the challenge of introducing too much change. Like if you're constantly tinkering with something and constantly adding things, like when you are an agency or a company that's larger than 20 people, I mean, it's not even that many people, you have to know that like change takes time.
Yeah.
And I think that we've also had this habit, historically, and we've done this less and less, that instead of creating iterative improvements on something, we actually just throw it out and create something else that's entirely new. And so I will say, like, it can be a little frustrating for some folks, which is like, just think about what you're creating. If it's a new Asana process, if it's a new, SOP for Slack, whatever it is to say, okay, this is the version 1.0. This is what we're going to do. And, as a leader, you can certainly think about what version 15 is going to look like and say it's going to have all these bells and some whistles. It's going to have automation. We're going to, we're going to tie it into ChatGPT, whatever it might be. But that you have to have like a product roadmap to say, all right, well, this is when these changes are going to take place. We want some adoption to occur. We want to create a feedback loop. And so I would say like, it really is, you have to bring everybody along rather than this like wholesale change and keep on tinkering. And people just don't even know where things are at that point. And it's just chaos.
Yeah. So helpful. So far we've been talking a lot about this kind of the two of the three, right? The people relative to the process relative to the people. And we can say a lot more about the people, of course, how people show up at work, their personality, how do they deal with stress, their maturity level, their skill sets. Can people even get better at a thing? Like there's so many interesting conversations, and many of which we will talk about through other lenses in future episodes. But I'd love to turn a little bit to product and whether the product is service or the service is a product or whatever it is that you're packaging up and people are giving you money for it. When you think about that, and the development of that product, what are the things that like you just want people who are listening to this episode to start with first, like first priority things when it comes to product as it relates to the people and the process?
Yeah. So I think product specifically, I will say that customer feedback is key, a feedback loop, and also knowing your market and knowing the competitive landscape, right? And so that's the product in and of itself. Now, when you're talking about a product to scale, I think that's where the people and process come in. So let's say, and for argument's sake, we're going to continue to lean on our service as the product. And so is the service so novel that only one person can deliver it? Is it scalable? Right? Because you usually have, and this is the stereotype, but I think this is true. You usually have a brilliant mind to think about this amazing thing that the market is saying they need. And, it's differentiated and it's really cool and it's going to change your business. The question becomes, all right, well, can you deliver this same service across the board on different types of clients, serviced by different individuals? So what is the bar you need to set on, hey, what is the level of expectation, right? So in our instance, I think it's easy for us to speak in specifics about this, is that we have a growth map. And our growth map has roughly 20 tabs, right? So currently it's a spreadsheet. It's a very automated, robust spreadsheet with a lot of modeling in it. It's a spreadsheet, 20 different tabs. There's the P&L forecast. You have your day-to-day breakdown of, your meta spend relative to your Google spend. You have all of your, creative concept logs, things like that. So you have to design it in a way that different people who have had different sets of experience can engage with it and create something, right? Which is a forecast broken down by daily media targets with creative concepts aligned in a way that is really impactful and high quality. And so that is where the art and science comes in, which is hey, you've designed the spreadsheet, but what is your expectation of the experience that your people are coming in with versus experience that they can gain at your company? And also what is the timing and the process to make sure that, if there are 10 different people engaging in the spreadsheet, that they all know what their responsibility set is and where the bar is set.
Interesting. So we're kind of going a little bit back to this, again, this kind of two-dimensional to the vertical to the timeline again of depending on where you're at with your company, the degree of sophistication of the product that you're developing, and first finding some kind of product market fit, whether it's through differentiation or, you're the first person to market or whatever the thing is. But at some point, if you're growing and maturing as an organization, if you have the most brilliant person delivering a service, you've already hit a ceiling on what you can do if that's the only person who can deliver it. And you got to find these mechanisms by which you can have anyone in the organization have a consistent deliverable that people really value.
Okay. I'm sorry. It's okay to decide that you don't want to scale, right? So if your business model is an independent consultancy where you are creating a novel solution for every single client and the amount of time you have is just the amount of time you have as an individual, that's a totally fine business model too. You'll probably charge a lot more for that too.
Yeah. You better charge a lot per hour if you want to grow. But you're right. I mean, that is how do you grow? You charge more for your time or the value that you create for the people and make that disproportionate. But I think what we can speak to uniquely at CTC is this kind of move to scale. So, and we have a really interesting founder who is pretty brilliant in these kinds of categories. And I think you could probably read a little history of CTC of really this exercise that you're describing of kind of scaling Taylor on some level and doing that in a way in stutters and starts that now we can look back and go, gosh, isn't this great? But it was a moments of real difficulty and pain and pulling the wrong lever at the wrong time. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit of that, because I have a hunch there's listeners who are like, well, this is nice, telling this revisionist history of how everything is awesome and you just got to do the thing. But the truth is there's no way forward without going through these valleys. They're very difficult sometimes. And I'm wondering if a couple come to mind in your mind, Orchid, of whether it be in the people category or the process category or the product category that are very predictable places that if you can solve these problems, you're going to be glad you did early.
So that was a lot. So I'm going to try to make sure that I answer it. But I definitely want to share a funny story about your point on scaling Taylor. So when I joined CTC,
maybe we should rename the podcast
Scaling Taylor. Yeah, I think you'd like it. I mean, it'd be good for SEO because people think that we're talking about Taylor Swift as well. But
that's right.
So when I joined at the end of 2021, one of my first executive calls, it was a Zoom. And Taylor was going through multiple tabs in probably 5 different spreadsheets to get at the material. The funny thing is that he didn't share his screen. So I had no idea what he was talking about or what he was looking at, but it felt like everybody else did for some reason. And as I got acclimated into CTC, I'm like, oh, well, like, why does this exist? I was like, well, that's really strange. Like, why does that exist over here? And then I said, oh, it's because that's how Taylor's brain works, right? So to your point about looking at things in multiple dimensions across timelines, I have a joke about Taylor, and I don't think he minds me sharing this, but this is true of CEOs from my experience, is that for CEOs, time is a flat circle. There's no yesterday, today, or tomorrow. It's all just right now. And so why I say that is because they do think in multiple dimensions at any given time. So what I noticed of CTC processes and the way that we worked was that it was all built based on how Taylor's brain works. Now, Taylor is a brilliant mind. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But it works in a way that it's not entirely logical, right? Meaning that he makes all these connections between various data points that if you were to build a process around it, I just don't think it would work in the same way. So the question became, okay, well, Taylor's already on version 50 of what our product can be. But we had to be very, I think, honest with ourselves about what version of CTC we were on. So the CEO's job, right, throwing the puck, he's version 50. We were at version 5, right? So then what you have to balance is, okay, well, in order to get to version 50, what are the things you need to improve? Now, people take time, no matter what you want to do with people. If you want to move them in different roles, if you want to upskill them, if you need to exit some people, if they're just not the right fit, anything that involves people will take time. So that's not going to be the first thing that you can do, right? You can probably start it in terms of like setting the bar, making sure you have the education in place, making sure you have the information for the people so they're clear on what that you expect out of them. Okay, process also takes time, but there's probably already some process in place. And so that's where you come in and you say, okay, well, are there ways we can streamline the process or, make consistent the way that people are working today? And this is where the iteration part of it is extremely important. What you don't want to do is just say, oh, like none of the process is working. We're going to introduce this entirely new thing. Because the reality is like what you have is probably good enough if you just make a couple of strategic and, very intentional changes to it. And then the product, I think again, the product is like customer feedback. Like, is it what you expect it to be? So you're always kind of thinking on all those dimensions at any given time. And the last thing I'll say is that, it's very typical for founder-led organizations to operate in a way that tries to replicate the way that the founder thinks. And I think that that's a very common trap that you fall into.
Why is it a trap?
It's a trap because this is very much a stereotype. But it's the founder's vision. I think they're usually very compelling people. We work with a lot of founders. We work for a founder who's really brilliant, who sees the world in a different way. That we may think. And so it's very tempting to say, oh, well, we're just going to replicate like how this person thinks, right? And they're usually the loudest voice in the room. They usually have the most at stake because it's their name on the door, things like that. So I do think it's like a very human trap that you fall into. And I think that this is a great case of when two things can be true at the same time. You can have a really intelligent founder who has vision and you want to replicate the way that you think. And you can also introduce a process that gets at the what but maybe the how you get there is a little different.
Well, as we're finishing up, it's funny. I think, I love my pencil sharpener and my pencils and my cue cards. And in the middle of all these things, I was thinking like, gosh, what's a good way to tie this up in a way that's relevant for folks who are listening and they can go do something with? And I'm wondering, and this is not pre-planned, but I'm wondering if you can help reflect a little bit. If someone's listened to the conversation so far and they were going to do one thing out of this as a principle in the people category, in the process category, or in the product category, what would you want to give advice to a friend over coffee with? You don't have much context because there's a lot of businesses being represented here in different kind of models and so on. But what's the right mindset they need to have as it relates to people, process, and product?
I don't know why my head just directly came here, but I would take a piece of paper, divide it into 3 columns. You have your headers, people, product, and process. And any challenge or any fire drill that you have to go through in any given week, I would start to categorize that challenge as like, what is the root cause, right? So if you're, let's say here's a really tangible example. Growth maps are not delivered on time. And just thinking about it across those 3 dimensions, it's like, okay, well, is it the process? Right? Like, and then we've looked at our process before. And I would say 2 years ago, we had like 50-step process and it was like a back and forth between like multiple people. So yeah, that's why it wasn't getting done, because there was no clear way to delineate when the handoff was happening and who was on first to pick it up. So I would say, yes, at that time, that was a process problem. Now our growth map's not getting done on time because the people assigned to that project or to that client, they don't have the right information. Then it was like, okay, well, how do we take them through training? Are they all really new relative to the company? So I would say, okay, well, like in that specific case, maybe it's just making sure that we upskill those people, that they get to shadow more senior associates, whatever that looks like. And then, I don't think product is a challenge in this case, but I would just go through and think about the challenges that come up or any fires that come up in the given term of the week, and then start to think about it in that framework and kind of like diving down and saying like, okay, where do I need to put my energy in order to solve this problem most effectively?
Awesome. So helpful, Orchid. And I hope it's helpful for those of you guys who are tuning in. It would be helpful for us to get feedback loops from you as you guys are considering this conversation and as you are taking an active role, contributing and leading your people business. Is this kind of a conversation helpful? And if so, how? And what are the gaps in your own felt need questions, the things that are coming up for you? And in the weeks to come, you can anticipate us coming at these kinds of questions through different lenses, different perspectives on ways to see the thing that you're trying to grow and build. And we promised a couple things. One, we promised to be honest. We'll tell you the truth, war stories included, but we'll also do it in a way that we hope is just practically relevant and helpful as you continue to build your business. So with that, thanks for the privilege of your attention and being here with us. Thank you, Orchid, for always inspiring me in this conversation. And it sounds flattering and you're my boss, but that's not the point. It's really a privilege to be a part of a project like this that takes things like people, process, and products so seriously. Thanks.
And Dane, I'm so excited to dive into the people part because that's where you really shine. So looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, Orchid.